The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Welcome back to the Nova Society, a space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by our regular panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon. Together, we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines, the history, and the big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what the panel has for us today. Today, we're going to welcome Adrianne Marsh. Adrianne has spent 2 decades helping Democrats win races, from Barack Obama's 2008 campaign to Claire McCaskill's 2012 re-election. She is CEO of Altum-Insight, where her team helps candidates and organizations translate research into compelling narratives and effective operations. They're currently finalizing a new study focused on rural voters in Nebraska, and one finding stood out immediately: a deep under-discussed fear of AI. Not the sensational sci-fi version of AI, but real concerns about accountability, trust, and who's responsible as AI starts affecting daily life. Welcome, Adrianne. It really is a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
This is going to be fun. So I have to ask the first question I got. Why Nebraska? I mean, we're not talking like the great hotbed of political intrigue or anything. We're talking Nebraska.
That's a very good question, and a fair one at that, because I wouldn't think that people would consider Nebraska as the hotbed of like contentious races these days. But there is a serious congressional and these days, when you don't know what the majority looks like, what it requires, every seat counts, and there's a congressional race there. It's also, we believe that there are places where not necessarily all red states are equal. And I don't mean that to say that some are great and some are not, but some have the elements of something that are showing signs where persuadable arguments might be more open. And so for that reason, there's just enough going on in Nebraska where it felt like we were able to get the kind of sample, the rural sample that we were looking for. So one of the interesting things about places like Nebraska or Oklahoma, or maybe even places like Indiana or my beloved Missouri — I'm not from Missouri, I'm from Michigan, but I often joke that I spent enough time on an RV in the back roads of Missouri that I practically qualify as one. But these places, they have ballot initiatives where they perform at levels of 55, 60, 65, 70% on progressive issues. We're talking Medicaid expansion. We're talking about minimum wage. We're talking about choice issues. They're performing very, very well. But these same states, Jesus Christ himself could run and put a D behind his name, and he can't get elected dog catcher. It's ridiculous that the brand is so heavy in some of these places. It's not our agenda that they're upset with. It's our brand. It's the way we're talking to people. So we're trying to go into places where there is that brand rejection is firm. The vacuum is there. We're not competing. We're not putting anything on the air per se in Nebraska heavily. We wanted to go in and find out what is going on. What do you think is happening? What do you think of us? And that's the cool thing about this research, is that this is not a form of research that's prevalent in really any way in politics. And I would say I can speak for that firmly in the Democratic side. I assume that's the Republican side. But this is a standard thing in market research for the last 20 years in product development. And what it does is it allows us to understand the stories people are telling themselves about the world around them, including the Democratic Party or candidates or toothpaste. They're telling themselves these stories about what these things are and the value they provide to their lives. And we not only get to have a realistic idea of where we are in that story, but we learn enough about how we got there that we can understand what to do about it. So yes, polling's important, focus groups are important, ad testing's important, but it's almost, that's too far down the line. We're starting too far in. We need this to happen in order to understand how to use those tools better and to be more accountable to voters. And we're just not doing it. This research helps us fix it.
My home state now, I'm from New York, from the upstate, not from the downstate like Scott is. So most people in New York consider where I'm from Canada. Basically,
I'm from Michigan, so
we're just Canadians. We're just Canadians that don't like live in Canada.
Exactly.
But in my current state of South Carolina, it's the same thing. Lindsey Graham again is up for re-election. He will probably win. even though everybody, when you sit and you talk to people, in the community here, they think he's a buffoon. And they're really not happy with him, but they just cannot bring themselves to hit that D. They just can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I have done campaign politics for over 20 years, and I got my start in Michigan, where I'm from. So similar, we're just a stone's throw away from Canada. But I grew up in a small town where I tell people sometimes I feel comfortable because I know how to speak Republican. My playground is the rural and red parts of this country. One of my very first congressional candidates that I worked for on the House side, Bart Stupak, he was the Dems for life. He was like one of the few right to lifers from the Democratic Party. It's interesting, the kind of communities that are there. I found as I navigated my way through on the ground campaigns, I was going to Colorado back when it was still purple. I was in Missouri twice. I was in Florida, which is, it's a red state now, but it was still a little bit purple then. I found myself really gravitating toward these communities of people that I could identify with. It's just a different connection point. There's a different case to be made in some of these places. And the Democratic Party, when I was younger, 20, 25 years ago, was a working class party. It was gritty. It was fighting for everything. It was inclusive, still the way it is now, but it talked with people instead of at. We lost a lot of that over the course of the last couple of decades, and it's shown up in the map. We have found ourselves losing ground in places like Missouri, that was once a classic bellwether. Indiana had a Democratic senator not but 10 years ago. These places, Ohio, which is now nearly out of reach for us, these are places where we've lost ground. North Carolina is hanging by a thread, but South Carolina, that potentially could be up for grabs if we knew how to talk to people. The problem is, as we lose that ground with people, and we cannot, no matter what we try, we cannot outpace the rate of loss with these voters, the map starts to squeeze us. We have a case to make to these voters, and yet we're just competing every single cycle for what it takes to win today in this one place that remains, that because we're only doing that, we're not thinking about how to claw back. We're losing ground. We're closing our map, and we're going to lose a majority for generations to come if we don't take this seriously. We ought to be going to South Carolina. We ought to be talking to those voters and figuring out what do you think about us and why? What do we do about it? Because I often tell people I'm a Democrat because I'm a Christian. And what I have to say about, things like Matthew 25, these are things that we should be having conversations about. Why are we running from these things? If we're the all-inclusive party, we have to include this part of the spectrum too.
I definitely get the idea that we have lost the religious people. Whether you're a Hasidic Jew in Brooklyn or you're an evangelical anywhere in the country, the Republican Party has, largely because of the abortion issue, which was more or less made up by Richard Nixon to divide voters from the Democratic Party. Because of that, we've lost a great deal of ground. It also seems to me the other part of this, I hope you'll address, is this idea that the Democrats are weak. It came up again in a poll just recently that the Republicans are willing to bust through the door and shoot everybody in the room without knowing who they are, but the Democrats would hover outside the door for hours on end and allow them to do anything they wanted to do without taking any action at all. And they would prefer the Republicans rushing in and shooting everybody and letting them sort it out.
That's a very accurate sense of what's happening. We did 2 different studies that I think speak to what you're saying. And one of them was a taxonomy of democracy with independent voters in Montana. We did that 2 years ago. And that was our first study. And the idea was to get a sense of the Trump paradigm about democracy and the Biden paradigm about democracy. And we sort of put it in the lens of we harvested those 2 candidate pieces of language, but couched it in more of the partisan messaging box. And then we sort of took from that some of the other thought processes around democracy out there. One of them was a more populist message that was a little bit more anti-big money, more like we're all in this together. They're all trying to manipulate things. And then, of course, there's this foreign actor piece that came out. And this is all harvested from conversations using an AI-generated moderator. And the tool ends up having these very interesting, deep conversations with people. And inside the spectrum of, let's say, 12 questions, every single engagement experiences the 12 questions. But in that process, it has a very unique, bespoke series of conversations with every individual user. It's unique to every single person. So in the process of this conversation, it's so gifted at sounding human that people have these very organic, evolving conversations. They think that they started with, hey, what do you like most about Montana? And get to, what do you think? What are your thoughts about democracy? They believe they got to that question on their own. In the process, they also understand it's not human. And to some degree, it's interesting because they're so used to engaging with bots and tech at this point that they also realize there's not a human on the other side of that conversation judging them. And it's almost like the anonymity of a comment section. They share things with you that are deep and maybe even profound or even salacious to some degree because they know no one's judging them. They're sharing, there's almost a confessional quality to how they're talking about it. And it was interesting. Their thoughts about what Democrats are was very much along those lines. Democrats don't even know who they are. We're not even sure what they stand for. They're not ready to act. Republicans, they may be impulsive. We may not agree with them, but they know exactly who they are, and they're going to do deliberate things, and they're going to challenge the status quo. The thing was, Democrats were sort of lukewarm on their own messaging. Republicans couldn't have been more excited about theirs. But when you take through that process, that ethnography that we do, we over 4 days integrate some of that language into these testing portals where they react to different languages. They record videos about what they feel about the language. And then we evolve that language. By the end, what we were testing was largely a populist message with a couple of pullouts from both of the different sides. And it was incredible. In the end, 95% of our participants agreed essentially with the populist message, and no one was using it. While we're, as Democrats, sitting here saying we want to protect democracy, we never bothered to ask people what they think about democracy. And so people were saying, well, democracy isn't particularly working out for me. I wouldn't say the government's actually doing much for me these days. And you all aren't talking about what to do about it. You just assume that protecting the status quo is what I want, when you're not even understanding that when you say democracy's on the ballot, to me, that's like saying the ballot is on the ballot, because we never bother to stop and say, what are your perceptions about these things to begin with? When we really got down to it, most people wanted us to fix democracy. And so to your point, the choice came down to a candidate, a woman who got there in a way that was not ideal for them, who largely said, I'm going to do what he did. And I know you didn't like him very much, but I'm going to do the same thing he was doing. So I'm going to protect the stuff that doesn't work for you. And then a guy who was like, I'm going to blow it all down. I'm going to burn it all down. They didn't want either one of those things. They wanted something that was disruptive in a more constructive and productive way, but neither candidate was offering those things. Neither candidate was really saying the real villain in the room is big money. The real villain in the room is like the corporate special interests that are kind of driving policy here, but nobody was saying that. So they went with, to your point, the Republicans. We're going to do something. It may not be what I want. It might be way too much, but it's better than nothing, which is what Democrats do. And just a little bit further on the Nebraska study with rural voters, their perceptions are that both parties, at least currently, are not doing right by them. But Democrats over the last 20 years have become an urban party. And what they think about that is that's not necessarily coded for anything, but they see as urban is not rural. It's not that urban is bad, but they believe that rural is better. It's special. And I'm from a rural town. It is special. It is different. They believe that if you don't understand them, then you're not going to fight for them. And we don't understand them. So we're the party that's basically not rural. And we can't get there because we have no credibility. And we are not really making inroads to get there. So Republicans have been, to some degree, in my view, granted, this is skewed, have been to some degree patronizingly pandering to that particular audience. And now I think that what we found in that rural study is that there are real fears about the values pieces of AI that are undermining small town values or undermining that special way of life. And more so than anything, they're undermining the future that they dream of for their kids, one that's now clouded and maybe unbelievable, and it's compromised. And it looks like Republicans are in bed with tech and they're in bed with AI. And this could be an opening for Democrats because we do have credibility around consumer protection. They may not believe us on a lot of things, but we do seem to have an anti-corporate America sort of thing. We could be using that to our benefit. We should be flipping that on its head and saying, we're actually going to go and we're going to pursue regulations along with you that protect your communities and protect your backyards from data centers and protect your family values. And that is an opening for us to start saying, and that's what this means to us. We can now have a values conversation with you that we've been shut out of for the last decade. So It's what you're saying is absolutely true. And right now we're at a very interesting cross section, potentially because of Trump, potentially because of where the party's gone, to change that, to shift that paradigm.
I've always said that Republicans were always the ones that told you who to fear and who's to blame for all your problems. And Democrats were always why you should feel guilty. But they never were really able to tell you how, not feel guilty about things or how to pay for things. I'm a moderate. I'm down the middle,
Same.
Neither Democrat nor a Republican. I hear what you're saying, and it is. They don't want to completely blow the building up. They want a slow burn.
Yeah, right.
They want a slow burn toward change. So in your study in Nebraska, whenever I think of Nebraska, I think corn. I think agrarian. I mean, I don't really think of big tech kind of things. Is this deep, under-discussed fear about AI have to do with that agrarian mindset that maybe these people in Nebraska has that created that? I mean, because let's face it, AI is a reality. Scott and I both teach online at universities, and AI drives us nuts. It's almost impossible for us to determine, is this really a student writing this or is this AI generated? It is so difficult. So when I'm looking at Nebraska, what I see is pretty much an agrarian kind of society. Maybe it's a little different now. I haven't been there in quite some time. Is that contributing to the fear? And is there an age difference in your Nebraska study? Older people are more leery, where younger people who are more used to the internet and things like that maybe are more reachable.
Prepare to be shocked.
I'm shocked. I'm already shocked.
For one, have you thought about asking AI if a student wrote it from AI? I'm kidding. That's a joke more than anything.
So,
pretty
anyway.
It's usually pretty obvious anyway.
Yeah, it can be.
I mean, I'm sure it's getting better all the time, but sometimes I'm shocked at how capable AI can be. But there are some pretty clear indicators when it's been probably cribbed from that space. But I think the interesting part about how we put together our studies, and I am not the researcher involved in this. So when I came to this conversation, it was largely because I've come from the world of ad making and mail and PR and doing political campaigns where the thing that we want to know more than anything is what your propensity is to vote Democrat, Republican, or in between, because that's how we bucket our messaging. That's how we know how to target what we're saying to you. But the interesting thing about this research is that the most important demographic information that we can assign to a panel is the gender split, because the way that men and women communicate is differently. So the panels are sort of split into men and women in the way that we talk to them. But when we try to segment a group, more so than anything, it's a generational grouping. And that is because the one thing, more so than anything else, that we experience together is time. So I might be from rural Michigan, and a cousin of mine might have grown up in Detroit, but we experienced the Challenger explosion at the same time. Or if a friend of mine from a different ethnic scenario, our experience of our first email was the same. And so you have these shared experiences that bridge gaps when other things become a little bit more complicated, because just because this person is of a different race, but they're geographically somewhere else, that becomes more difficult, but you experience time the same way. So in this particular study, we grouped Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X together. We did not group boomers in because they tend to have similar behaviors to Gen X Gen Xers, but also kind of deserve their own bucket to some degree. This study, we wanted to try and group people fairly small. So we thought we could always come back to the boomers if we needed to. The interesting thing about that was that the people who had the most vitriolic reaction to AI were the Gen Zers. They didn't like it. They don't trust it. They don't want to use it. I'm sure they have learned to do it. I'm sure there's probably been some benefits in their lives, and they're clearly much more comfortable with tech than maybe the rest of us. But they also understand why it shouldn't be trusted and what its potential can do to us.
Real quick, what would you consider Gen Z? What's
There's
the age
actually
group we're talking?
Right. There's actually a specific cutoff on this, and I want to say it's 26 to 18. It might be that's their age group. There are years, but it's interesting. And then the millennial group, the people who were closer to the Gen Z cusp, behaved the same way. Those who were the elder millennial type, closer to my generation, Gen X, they were far more like, hey, it's happening, and this is amazing thing. An email that might have taken me forever before, I can just do, and it gets. My husband like rarely does any email without at least consulting ChatGPT first. That just blows my mind because he barely writes texts, and because he's just, wasn't really that into tech. Now it's kind of tech is doing tech for him. This has become an incredible time saver. I think that for some reason, the older generations seem to trust it differently, which I found to be completely opposite of what my assumptions would have been. But to your point about the sort of the cultural, like the values-based culture pieces that come from rural communities where they're based on a more agricultural or just limited exposure to things like big tech facilities, the kind of industrial pieces that you might get in a metro or urban area. It is interesting because they also accept that AI is happening. They also accept that there's no avoiding it at this point. You can't put the cat back in the bag, but it will come for us if we're not careful. I think there's only so many times that you have to double click and see, is that deer really jumping on a trampoline, before you realize that it's incredible what you can fake. And I think they're now realizing that in Missouri, it's the show me state. And the reason it's the show me state is because it's like, the proof is in the pudding. And I think that carries over to so many different small town communities where trust is verifying. And so much of that is showing up for each other. So much of that is doing what you say you're going to do. There's something about this faux world that you can have in the AI spectrum that feels completely contradictory to that lifestyle. They see that is an enticing thing for young people, and they want to protect their kids from it. It not only has economic implications. Data centers are showing up in people's backyards. Not only is that problematic in terms of like it undermining just a landscape, literal visual landscape of something that they value very much, but it's increasing their water bills. It's challenging the environment around them. It's undermining so many things. But it also, there's a values piece of that seemed to be a far larger concern. And simple regulations like, if it's AI generated, it should have a disclaimer on it or some kind of marking on it that says this is AI generated. So there's a really great bullshit detector that's very obvious for everybody. Why can't we do that? Why are we not demanding that? It's a good question. That seems pretty simple. To the same point that you were saying about being able to detect whether a paper is AI generated or not. Is there some kind of watermark system that's produced when things happen like that? Is there something that you can do to make it very clear? I don't know. I'm certainly not the person to ask about tech answers like that, but it seems like there are at least probably some things that we can do right away, and certainly ways that we can navigate that into the future.
I usually feel when I see bullet points, that's AI.
Yeah,
because AI loves bullet points. It loves organization. And so when I see students using bullets, I'm like, that's a red flag, and I'll just check out some of the vocabulary to see whether it sounds like them or not. Anyway, I want to get back to something that you said that was kind of interesting, where you said that urban means urban is not a
coded
signifier or a code word for Black.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that the two groups that the Democratic Party has become associated with and in some senses saddled with are Black voters and women. And it's not lost on me anyway. I don't think it should be lost on anyone that Donald Trump ran 3 times, lost to one white man, and beat two women. And it kind of goes hand in hand to me that the cliche is that women are weaker than men, even though all evidence to the contrary, at least as far as I can tell in my experience. And that urban means black, and the Democratic Party has become the party of the black people.
I very much understand your assumption, and it's incredibly fair, and there's probably a lot of merit to it. And I'll make a distinction. That is just not what this study was focused on pulling out. And the reason, and I don't want to say that with 100% confidence, because my guess is that there is some of that happened. If people have a chance to go to our website, altum-insight.com, and click on news, the presentation for this study is there. And one of the questions we got at the end of the presentation to the ethnographer who did most of the time with these different panel participants was that very same question. And she said, we know because we asked them. And now, granted, they might have felt guilty about sharing what urban meant to them. There is always that. She believes it wasn't necessarily about a demographic feature, but the way that we were communicating with them around urban was more values-based. And I wouldn't say that makes it an altruistic lens, that this is somehow not race-based. I will say that they put their community on a pedestal, and there is probably some of that baked into that values perception of what you're talking about. They believe that there's nothing better than being a rural community. They've chosen to be there, that it's a very special place. No one can be like them. I understand that. There's a lot of of identification in one's persona about who you are and what you're from and what that community is like. That's part of that process. And it's easy to say, I can go to a place where everybody's from everywhere and I lose my identity, but there's something very preserved about being from rural and staying in rural. There's a pride there that people see. One of the scientists said there's almost like a narcissistic tone about it, that there is such a pride to it. And so it was really about a difference in, I am better than anyone else. And the Democrats are not here, so they are not better than me, and I am not them. So it seemed much broader than the racial confines that you're talking about. My guess is some of that's included in there. And my guess is that perception is still significant and probably is worth studying. I think separately, to make a point that's really interesting about men, we studied men in Pennsylvania right before the 2024 election to find out, is the perception of Democratic operatives that we've lost men, we can't persuade them, they're the party of Trump, and we can't get them back. Is it as hardened and sort of this abrasive masculinity the way that we think it is? And it was fascinating because in some ways it is, but that is what they believe that society expects of them. They now sort of see their role as something a little bit more complex. They also see that it's nearly impossible to meet the expectation that they are softer, that they are more of a protector role, that they have, that their value there is to be something that's more multidimensional than we've expected of men previously. And that's largely because, women have a different voice. We went through the Me Too movement. There are now new boundaries that sort of suggest that the shift of power is slightly changing. That's a good thing. It's not that they're fighting it. They don't know how to adapt to it. And the expectation is that they're not allowed to have feelings about it either. It's a very complicated place, and no one is studying men through that lens of their emotional obligation and how we bring them closer to this sort of more integrated, softer role. It'll be interesting because if the Republicans continue to force their hand on putting men in that box, there may also be an opening there over the next handful of cycles for us to sort of talk to people as partners more often. We segment them differently. And I wonder in every case if we shouldn't, if maybe there's more commonality there in recent years than we might be giving men credit for. It was a small study. It certainly bears a lot more research, but I was shocked to find out that men didn't necessarily align with Trump from like the sort of chest beating place I thought they would. The thing about this research over and over again is just how much I'm shocked at my assumptions about people. People are across the board far more complicated and far more emotionally motivated than political strategy gives people credit for. We're shortchanging people in a way that that is so different. And I've made this point before. We took the model for this research from corporate market research, where people would study preferences about buying toothpaste or what cracker box they're going to take off the shelf. Women are the ones making the choices. So the cracker box needs to be green because they like saving the earth. These are all interesting things that go into these decisions about packaging and product and ingredients. But that's because they're making a one-off choice about a healthy cracker to eat. This is about people making choices about the agenda of the country. This is about paradigms of democracy. This is about funding public education, how much we're going to value that, how we're going to handle healthcare. Are we going to be a preventative healthcare society, or are we going to be reactive to sickness in the worst, most expensive way possible? We can make decisions about that collectively if we give people the credibility that we can have an emotional conversation about what that pressure feels like for them. And one of the studies, and I don't mean to keep going and going, so please cut me off if I am, but we did an interesting study of Gen Z Latinos in Arizona, where the group came to us and said, we've been polling this group of voters, the segment of voters, and what's coming out is affordable housing. And we've been doing all this work with influencers and ads with affordable housing, and they just don't seem to be connecting. We can't figure out what's going on. Can you take a look at this segment? And in this case, it's much like the rural communities, and with the men, it's more psychographic, where we don't go in and say, what do you think about affordable housing? We go in and say, hey, what's going on? And I liken this a little bit to what it would be like if you go in and you talk to me about, this is sort of I primed you in the beginning about football. If you were to say, I want to talk to you about football because I want to make you a Giants fan, because I learned that you are both Giants fans, I would say, no way. I am set in my ways. I'm not going to move. I'm a Lions fan. I'm going to literally put on my jersey. And of course, Dan Campbell's is just the dude. So I would talk all about him. And I would say,
former
no way.
Giant. Dan
What's that?
Campbell, but former Giant Dan Campbell.
And
Yes.
also a former player for the Lions. So he's a fantastic guy. But anyway, the point is, I'm a huge Lions fan. And if you're trying to make me a Giants fan, I'm probably going to be resistant to that, because I know what you want to talk about. I'm going to be hardened about it. I know what my position is. I'm going to marry myself to the facts that I hold dear, and that's going to be where I'm at. I'm not going to be open to having that conversation. But if you come to me and say, hey, where are you from? What did you do growing up? Like, how do you spend your time? By the time you learn that I'm a Lions fan, you've learned so much about why I'm a Lions fan that you can connect with me about maybe nostalgia, about the grittiness of the team, about why it's important, all kinds of things. You might be able to make some effort in opening up a conversation I might not have had otherwise. It would certainly be more interesting. We'd be able to share information back and forth as opposed to being literally on opposite teams. The same thing is true of the approach we take to ethnography. So we went in to study the segment of voters, and it's just a conversation about, how do you spend your time? What's going on in your life? What are the pressures you're experiencing? What we found after the 4 days, when we finally got to sort of the issue sets and the political thoughts about the different choices that they were faced with, we found that these voters they identified more as Gen Z Americans than they did as Latinos, but they also knew that where they found themselves in their life and in their place in society came from sacrifices before them. And so they understood that they were supposed to be the American dream. And they felt like they were letting those sacrifices down. They weren't honoring the work that had been done before them because they couldn't afford a house. It was a symbolic marker that was the American dream. And they felt like they weren't mad at anybody, but they also knew that policies and the political choices that they were looking at didn't set them up for success. They knew that they were working several jobs, the gig jobs. They were never going to be able to afford a house. And so it wasn't just aspirational. It was a burden. The American dream had become an anxious burden for them. And we weren't talking to that. We were talking about how they were going to afford rent. And that was just so superficial. It sounded patronizing, like the things that were heavy in their heart weren't bigger than that because they were just some young punk kids. That's how we were talking to them. And we were losing them. It was almost doing more harm than good. When you shifted that tone and started integrating that into the influencer program, we saw the connection starting to happen again. It was remarkable how integrating that emotional connection with people got them to listen to us differently. We should be doing that across the board with segment after segment after segment, treating people differently and understanding their specific concerns differently. That's how we build trust with voters. And it's interesting because so much about this model for ethnography is built off of the stairway model of behavioral change. And that model, it begins with active listening, much like what we do in these panels. And then it's sharing empathy, it's building rapport, it's establishing influence, and then it's behavioral change. These parties come in with exerting influence. We'll say, vote for me because this is my story and this is what I'm going to do for you. Well, they don't give a shit what your story. Sorry if I'm swearing. We don't care what your story is, and we don't care what you're going to do because we don't believe any of you people anyway. 22% of people trust government right now, trust Congress. That's astounding because they have no reason to trust us. So in the end, I think it's about understanding that we have to listen to people. We have to repeat what they're saying back to them. This is where we are. We accept this reality. And because you told us what you want to do about it, this is what we're going to do because we heard you. Does not matter who I am. I can be, somebody who just got out of college or hasn't had a job in 10 years, or I can be a PhD professor. I can be anything as long as I'm listening to you. That's really what people care about more than anything. The resumes don't matter as much, and we need to get that. It does not matter how many times you've been elected. It matters that you pay attention to what I care about and that you're going to do something about it. We're going to fix democracy, not protect it. I will step off of my soapbox now.
No,
Sorry.
Great soapbox. I thought that was great.
The question that comes to mind now is that like polling is a blunt instrument compared to this. And yet we're so poll driven in everything that we do in politics and asking people. We poll people on questions that they have no influence on, just to find out what they think of it, right?
Yeah.
And instead of trying to dig into why they're feeling the way that they feel, and I don't know if the intelligence that you got in Arizona, I think it was Arizona, was actionable for anybody, but it certainly is interesting.
So two things. It's a great question. The issue in some ways is that when polling was a really valuable instrument in the Democratic Party, but in politics generally, we were basically ramping up campaigns maybe as the earliest was midsummer before an election in a general election cycle. The money was, millions of dollars, not $12 billion. Last cycle, we spent $12 billion between the two different parties. Between that rivals industry spending along pharmaceutical lines, automotive lines. These are big ad spenders. We're there and we're still acting like we're some corner store making buttons and going door to door. I mean, we still do go door to door, but it's far more sophisticated than that. We've got gobs of money. It's a 365 situation. It never stops. We are a full legitimate industry and we're still starting with polling when this kind of research has been standard practice in those same industrial places for 20 years. So it's not that we don't need polling because those same industrial places, those efforts are still polling. The problem is we're looking to polling to do this too, and it doesn't. It's a tool that does exactly what you're saying. It takes a snapshot in time of how people believe about issues, their perceptions of language, but it's canned and it's boxed. What happens right now is a handful or a group of consultants who may have tons of experience sit in a room somewhere in Washington, D.C. or somewhere else, and they say, all right, let's poll this congressional district's independent voters as a bucket. We're going to cross-tab it so we'll pull out a couple hundred people. But the idea is we're going to all sit down and say, what should we include? Okay, we're going to include the economy, immigration, healthcare, name the typical battery that goes into the issues. We're going to test this guy because we think his name recognition is big and how it compares to the job performance on this guy. We're all just guessing what should go into this in this instrument, and then we're going to put it out there. But let's say of the 10 issues that you put on that list, it was the 15th that you didn't put on there that was values components of AI, and you didn't know that. Well, then we're missing it. I tell a story a lot that and maybe you all will appreciate this. The younger audiences don't always remember this, but when I was working on the 2004 Kerry campaign, I was on the communications staff, and our communications director, Rodell Molyneux, said every single night, we're going to dial into the field calls. And what that is a bunch of field operatives who have gone door to door, have talked to voters all day long. They report into their captains about what they're hearing at the doors, so that they are, if they need talking points, or if they need more stickers, or if they need more turf cut, that all their resources are included. And we would get in every night. And so right around the time that the Swift boats attacks were happening to Kerry, you might recall, these are people who served, and they said, he isn't who he says he is. This entire profile he's riding home on isn't real. And right away, we were hearing that at the doors. The field operatives would be saying, this is a big problem. We don't know what to say about it. Okay, well, we've got the comms team on here. What do you say? Well, we don't know. We'll call DC and find out what the headquarters wants us to do. Well, they said, we're not hearing about it. It's not showing up in the polls yet. So it's not an issue. Okay, well, we don't want to validate it. We're not going to say anything about it. It just gives it credibility. Every day, it gets worse and worse and worse. Weeks in, we finally get word from DC. Okay, it's showing up in the polls now. Well, at that point, is it too little too late? What if we had been listening to the voters? 80% of the doors are hearing about Swift boat ads, and we're not going to do anything about it? That's what this does, is it essentially says, maybe we're not asking the right question. Maybe we're not framing this the right way. Maybe we need to be doing something about it. Polling is useful to a degree, but it cannot be doing all the research things at the same time. This is a spectrum of research that goes from deep qualitative, like we're talking real embedding yourself with communities over years and years and years, to something a little bit more approachable, which is the form we do. It's not months and months like the industrial product research people do, but it's several days going back and forth with people through these modules. And then you get into something that's more quantitative, which is mass amounts of people and a series of questions that are very baked in. You can't expound on that. You can't give the why. We not only know the what, but the how and the why and what we do about it. We can then take any one of those components and then ask the quantitative features to find out, okay, this group of 60 people, 70% of them proactively offered this up. That sounds like it's ripe for a poll. Let's find out how many people believe that. Well, now we can statistically understand just how big of a problem that is, because we got a sense it was a problem. Now we can understand just how vast it is. That's how those tools work together. And we're really not doing a great job within either party of understanding how to do that. Hopefully this gets there.
It might be because I pay attention to these things, that I think that when you're polling people are answering the way that the polls suggest they should. And, you have choices within a range, but you're responding the way that you think the pollster wants you essentially to talk about it. I asked about actionable as far as digging deep inside people and finding out that they feel that they're betraying the American dream by not owning a house.
Yeah.
How do you turn that around? Because I'll bet that if you go back to them a week later, that would not be on the surface anymore. Like, you got it from deep down to the surface, but as soon as you walk away from it, it begins to sink back down, deep down again. And they may not even recognize that they feel that way anymore until it's like going to therapy, until you uncover something, right? So then again, I go back to this question. How does that help those candidates who are running?
That's a great question. And I didn't mean to forget to do that, but I did forget to address that comment. So with that particular program, what what they were trying to do is that group understood it was important to meet that segment of voters where they were. And so they get much of their information from TikTok and from Instagram. And so they were working with influencers that had a serious following in this particular area, but obviously with this particular generation. And what they did was they had us create a portal where we didn't try to give them talking points. We gave them straight from the voters what they were saying in some of these conversations. We pulled out this sizzle reel of a video that just literally had these voters recording their reactions to whatever that particular question was that day. Now, Gen Z voters are very prolific in using tools like recording. They're very comfortable to download that way, whereas like it's a little bit more uncomfortable for me to be sharing my deepest, darkest feelings with my phone, knowing I don't know who's that's going to. I'm a little more guarded. This group, that was a prime portal entry. We would not necessarily do that with everyone, but this group, it works very well. We pulled out from those videos where they took it like literally from their bed, from their car. We're talking like they are in the midst of their lives. You get to see them feeling it when it's striking them. That's different from focus groups, by the way, where you're in a room with other people. That mob sort of group mentality ends up sort of being undermining the whole point of being authentic. None of that happens here. If they've been thinking all day, I got to answer that question from this group, and they've been thinking about it and it strikes them just as they're like walking out of the grocery store. They'll pull out their phone and they'll record and they'll say, you know what, this is where it is. And they'll tell you the minute it strikes them. That has value. We took that out, gave it to the influencers. It's important for the influencers to be able to use that in their own voice, in their own brand, not the way we want them to, but the way that they understood it from the voters. Now, it's obvious as part of this that it's important for you to take the next step. Now, translate that to Harris. Here's how we suggest you think about that. They did it. And that's where we found those connection points, is that we were actually finding activation with that group of voters. And that is something that is also a challenge with operatives, because polls will gauge agreement. How do you feel about protecting children? Well, 100% of people are, of course, going to agree that you should protect children. But is a particular candidate having fought for children and believes this regulation is important to protect children from the woes of AI? What do you think about that? I also agree with that. Would you go with me and do this? Or would you go to the polls and vote? It's important that we elect this person because this is the consequence if we don't. That's activation. And this ability to understand how we can translate agreement to activation, this is also something that this tool can do. One of the ways that we have started experimenting with how you gauge that, it's difficult sometimes to measure it, but you can gauge it. And we took some script comparisons. So these are field scripts. So if someone knocks on your door and they say, hey, we know that you're a voter. And are you this person? Okay, great. Well, there's an election coming up next Tuesday, and this is your choice. This guy is really bad and this guy is really good, and you should go vote for them. And can we sign you up? Can we count on your vote? Yeah, sure. Well, they probably won't. They probably are going to forget. Okay, that was like a meh conversation, to say the least. Our suspicion was that when we're starting to understand the qualitative pieces that we can pull out of those conversations, they're largely leading conversations that are getting that Jersey situation to happen. They're feeling out their team. Do I agree with you? Don't I agree with you? Am I going to fight with you on this? Or is it not worth my time? We found that if you apply more of that ethnographic formula for conversation, where you come in and say, hey, how are you? What are you just coming from? Have you found that it's difficult to afford things these days? Or, how is your life? Just let's have a conversation before we get started here. I'm just interested to know what's going on. What are the stresses that you're going through? Again, by the time you get to the end, they believe that they have organically led you to have a conversation about who's responsible for this negative thing you're experiencing. What do you think needs to be done about it? Do you think that the Democrats have a chance? Well, what about this? By the time you get there, they're sort of saying like, yeah, it's not so bad. When we did a test in North Carolina of that traditional script versus a more research-based script, We came back to them 2 weeks later and asked, do you remember this conversation? What do you remember about this conversation? What was your takeaway about it? Again, we need to do more research about this. That's the caveat. Researchers are always telling you can't say that this is the ultimate takeaway. And I'm sure you all would appreciate that, since I'm sure the integrity of what you do is the same. But the bottom line is we found a significant difference between retention. They retained more of that conversation. They remembered why it was Democrats, that this was good for Democrats. And they remembered that it was interesting because it wanted to know about them, which the first script did not. So we also need to be understanding exactly what you're saying. How does this help candidates? If we learn how to approach these conversations differently, we might actually get better results. But we're still doing the stuff that we were doing 10 and 20 years ago.
Well, we're definitely going to be putting up a link to this study that you did. And there was a couple of things that I'm actually looking at right now, which kind of surprised me. Now, this was conducted in 2025. Trump is the president at that time. Do you feel like your values are reflected in society at large? Democrats, only 33% now. But if you look at Republicans, it's the exact opposite. 67% now. You've got your guy in. How can you not feel that your values are reflected in society at large? That kind of was a disconnect to me. I'd have expected that to be completely opposite. And the second thing that I took out of this was, which might be something that Democrats can maybe give back a portion of the electorate on, men are more likely to trust AI than women. So is it possible that men, since they're going to trust AI, maybe Democrats can use that to bring in more of the male fold?
I mean, again, I think that we need to be doing a lot more research with this group, and I would hope that we would. But I think the interesting part about so many of the assumptions that we had going into this study was this was a few weeks after Democrats had some pretty great victories, and we heard nonstop talk about affordability, that affordability was going to be the king of the conversation for the next year, and that's all we should be talking about on our ads. Well, obviously, we expected that to show up. We didn't ask them, how do you feel about affordability? Or, are these the top 10 issues that are important to you? We asked them, what are your greatest concerns? And as you'll see from that study, it wasn't necessarily close. We thought maybe some trade issues might be coming up at this point, that rural healthcare accessibility would be an issue. And we didn't. It was tech. It was wild. It's the same thing. You sort of assume that this group of people is going to be a certain way, or that the indications from literally 2 weeks before are going to show up in some way. And you're thinking, this is why we can't take these broad takeaways to the electorate at mass. We need to be segmenting people and understanding them differently, because as the title of this report ends up being, is the crack in the red wall. Because it turns out we may have some opportunities here. And like I was saying about men in Pennsylvania before, I don't know if we should be calculating our winning strategies based on these assumptions. One of the things that I think it reflectively looking at the 2016 campaign with Hillary Clinton was they wanted to expand the electorate by saying, all right, we're just never going to win these guys, these voters, these men. So we're going to register, we're going to reach out, we're going to expand women, people of color. We're going to go into our soft spots and push. And that was a mistake because math, that doesn't add up to winning. I mean, there's a lot that went on that year that we can probably point to, just like that Kerry reference. Was it that? I don't know. There's probably a lot of things that go into it, that death by 1,000 paper cuts, but also math. So, and she did very well in Texas, for example. It just doesn't hold water. We need to be figuring out how we study segments of voters and act like we're spending $12 billion on ads. And a statistic I've shared before, which is a little fuzzy, so I'm going to use general numbers because I've been challenged on this before. But in corporate research, they spend typically 10 to 1 on market research to the ad dollars they spend, whereas we spend roughly 100 to 1. That we don't research people. We research self-research. We do opposition research. We do polling. We do focus groups. It is not enough, not even close. These corporations understand that the way that they get profit, the way that they run their business models is that they have got to take consumer choices seriously. And we don't. We throw spaghetti at the wall and hope something sticks. And that is just not doing the trick because, to your point, the biggest problem is that we've lost trust with these voters. They're ready to think of something new. They want to have a conversation. Will we rise to the occasion and talk to them about the things they want to talk about? Will we listen to them and be where they are? Or are we going to talk at them some more and tell them how great we are and how we know what's best for them, which is so incredibly patronizing. We're smarter than you. We know what you need. Yeah. You're just these, rural people who just don't know any better. Bless your heart. That's exactly how we come across. And we can't do that anymore because it's closing the map. We are losing. And I get it. They are losing too. We've got some great years here and there, but let's be clear, we're going to win this cycle because they punched themselves in the face, not because we did anything right. And that's not a durable majority. That's not a durable plan to generational winning. And if winning is about truly saying we believe we have an agenda that is worth presenting to the people, then it ought to be. Because one of the worst parts about all of this is that we also know, what is that statistic that it's for every negative thing said, it takes 5 positive things to undo it. The same is true in ads. We know negative ads work. So we fire. It's like it's a death squad. We're just firing negative at each other. And it's a downward spiral to that guy's bad, but he's worse. No, he's worse. He's lying. They're all bad. In the end, that's why we have a 22% trust rate with members of Congress, is because there's no reason anyone has to trust anyone in government, because all we have is nothing but terrible things to say about each other. And it's never about people. It's always about us. We're just not getting it. This has got to be a two-way street. We've got to be accountable to people for them to trust us. Right. And we're basically at rock bottom. I mean, I like to sort of say, I can't imagine anyone's pleased with what's going on in our country right now for any number of reasons. I'm sure there are some people, but it doesn't matter where you are in the political spectrum. You can't really think that this is how this was supposed to go. That's because we're doing it wrong. The people are, the founding fathers said, we the people are supposed to be the main central focus of how this gets done. And it is the last thing that we're paying attention to right now. And that's bad. It's going to be bad.
Yep. I know Scott's always has said a couple of times on the podcast, in 2004, when he woke up, he really did expect Kerry to be the president. And he was shocked that it wasn't.
You and me both.
I have to admit, I was out of town when the nominations for 2016 came across, and my first comment was Clinton and Trump. These are the best two schmokies we could come up with. We need a better political class, plain and simple. And I think that's something that the founding fathers, I would not give the founding fathers as much credit as you do. I really wouldn't. These were
I'm not giving them credit, but they made it clear.
But they also put those little roadblocks in there to make sure that they had the control of what's going on. And I'm reading. This really is a fascinating study, and we encourage really get into this, because there's a lot of stuff that you're going to look at this and say, really? And it comes out to you. My form of research is most, as you mentioned before, phenomenology. How do different people experience the same thing? And I truly believe, like you said, time. Everybody experiences time the same way. They have a different, feeling about it. When the Cubs won the World Series, how that happened, I don't know. My wife, who was from Chicago, experienced it quite a bit different than I experienced it, being a New York Mets fan. So I think maybe a lot of, to get in the insight of some of these voters, we have to really look more to phenomenology. How do you feel about this thing? I don't care if you're Gen Z. I don't care if you're, Republican. I don't care if you're black, white, pink with polka dots. It does not matter. How do you feel? What does this make you feel? And then base a platform off of that. And I think phenomenology sometimes it's very complicated. Not very many people really use it very well, but it's a really good way to get the actual heartbeat of what the electorate is feeling. So Nebraska, you've answered why Nebraska, because obviously Nebraska was a lot more fascinating than I thought. Because when you think of it, you just never. I mean, again, I thought corn. I mean, corn, cows, and sheep. That's what's in Nebraska. But all right, so you know where your problem lies, and you're right. You're probably going to have a very, very good 2026. I really believe that you're going to. That's not to people that listen. That is not a prediction, because everybody knows the Nova Society is the worst at predicting anything. So we don't do it. We just don't do it. We're really bad at it. But I think you're going to have a really good 2026. But most of that is because, as you put, they punched themselves in the face. I mean, they did this to themselves, and this recent war thing has made it even worse. So I don't think it's going to go very well for the Republicans in 2026. Who knows? Because there's a lot of time. People change their minds. If you're a Democrat candidate today, do you just focus today on those areas where those Republicans have punched themselves in the face, or do you want to look beyond that? Because as you put, Congress is 23% approval rating, but 95% of them are going to get reelected. Because most of the electorate says, oh, it's not my congressman, it's your congressman that's the problem, and I can't change him or her. So is there a message out there that this study would help, especially, when we're talking about AI, and AI is going to get bigger, technology is going to continue to advance, and it's going to become even a bigger deal than it is today, and it could become very problematic. Should a Democrat candidate today just focus on the punch in the face, the negative of the punch in the face attitude, but can they put in something that is more future looking? And how can AI help them do that?
That's that last phrase is going to be the kicker, because I don't know the answer to that part. So I'll put that aside. I firmly believe that we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I firmly believe you can take whatever we need to do to take the maximum ability to squeeze every outcome we can from this opportunity, which is they've created a pretty delightful landscape for us. And do we use the tactics that we know work and that we can use to win each and every seat we possibly can peel off this cycle? Yes, I suppose we can. I also think that we cannot do that with the end point being November of 2026. We have to also be looking far beyond that. And this is a little bit about the strategy that has come about from Citizens United, which is there's hard side spending from the candidates themselves, and this comes from direct donations to candidates, and then there is this non-disclosed, just endless amounts of money that swim in the political action committee world, in the independent expenditure world. What has typically happened from a strategic point of view in the past is that the candidate's priorities and strategy trumps everything else. And so a candidate will run a series of ads or put out a strategy, and they will put a red box on a website, or they'll broadcast in some way, or be able to find hybrid ways to work with these soft side campaigns to layer up, to stack what they're doing, because the overall concept is that the independent expenditure effort should do no harm. We should just be enhancing what the candidates want to be doing. But what ends up happening is that it's too much all at one time, and it's saturated, and it ends up being entirely about candidates and entirely about the very tactical elements of that one unique situation, instead of it being, why aren't we pulling out the soft side money and doing brand repair, brand strategy all year round, and let that not be an albatross to these campaigns, which, like I said before, in places like Oklahoma, where ballot initiatives routinely perform at very high rates, and then you could put Jesus Christ on the ballot as a Democrat and couldn't get elected. That is because that D on the name is a problem. If we spent all year, every year, with part of that $12 billion just conveying beliefs, doing this kind of ethnographic study, it's a lot like Coca-Cola ads, right? They're not going to roll out some crazy new product without making sure that people remember to take a chance on that new product, because remember, you love the crisp, lovely taste and the nostalgia of Coca-Cola. They're constantly doing like, you remember, you know, the taste, you know, these things. If we're not using brand to understand that stuff, then we're setting up candidates to like have to basically define who they are and run with it on their own, isolated every single cycle. We're not helping them. And it's fascinating because just speaking of ads, the kind of thing that you can convey in these ads, to speak to your point about the emotional piece and this phenomenon thing, is a lot about that brand piece. When we're talking about pharmaceutical ads, which I have talked about before, if you look at pharmaceutical ads, which is our ethnographic model is based on a lot of what's coming out of the pharmaceutical industry, they tell a story, and it's not about choosing a product. It's not about choosing a specific pill. It's a formula where you see the ailments of a particular person experiencing something in their life. I have a hard time moving. I just had I can't be near my grandchild. I can't do this or this or this. And then you're not selling them a pill. You're showing them agency. You're showing them this idea that they can make a choice about a path forward, about doing something. They have a choice to put on their own hero cape and become their own hero. And then the rest of the ad shows them what that life looks like after they've made that decision. Now they can jump on a trampoline. Now they can be with their grandkids. Now they can do these things. They can be in the Olympics. They can do whatever they want now because they've made the decision to do this. Now, the technicalities of the ad might speak to your particular ailment, but the formula is there. The landscape, the brand of like, it's not scary to take chemicals for your body because it does such good. We need to be connecting with people all the time about why the Democratic Party does this and this, the same things that are conveyed in these ballot initiatives, that we're actually more aligned with your values. We're going to protect your family. We are as gritty as you are. We need to be talking about those things in that kind of formula. Make the choice that that's what you want for America too. You want America to reflect you. Well, we are you. Come along with us. We can do this. We can shape America differently. Then when the candidate runs, they can say, and I'm an extension of that. And here's why I'm not just you for America. I'm you for your backyard. That is kind of the formula that we need to be doing. And I realize I'm missing part of the question that you asked. Forgive me. What was the second part?
Oh, no, that's fine. I was kind of focusing on the, take a pill, and if you're a grandparent, you can jump on a trampoline, and that probably attributes to more broken hips than it does to.
There's a new pill for that.
But yeah, but we got a pill for that. Don't worry about it. I guess to put it a different way, as far as the second part of the question, this is a great study. This talks about rural Nebraskans. How can the Democratic candidate in North Carolina fighting for his life use this? Or can he?
I mean, yes, he can. I mean, the bottom line is yes. And I'm going to use a little bit of a distant jog to get there. But if you looked at some of the candidates just in November, there were a handful of Democrats who did very well. A couple of them are mayoral candidates, a couple of them gubernatorial candidates. It's interesting because Mamdani did a great job of going out into the streets and doing these man on the street interviews. I'm sure they were canned. I'm sure they were set up, but it looked very much like he was having these conversations. Well, his language was also reflective of not just those issues, but the style. He did a recent interview where he was, or not an interview, it was a recent ad where he and AOC, and now granted, they're far more progressive than where I am personally, but I think that speaks to them matching the electorate that they're in. He was doing outtakes. He was trying to record a Spanish ad for enrolling in pre-K 3, I think it was. And he was trying his very best, but he kept getting it wrong. And she was helping him out. And it was supposed to be really funny. The entire ad basically got the message out in a series of outtakes where he messed up. So now he's not assimilating. He's not being patronizing. He's not messing up. He's being authentic to who he is, because he probably heard from people like, how are you going to do that? You don't speak Spanish, or like, you're terrible at that. How are you going to pretend to be something you're not? He found a very clever way almost at every point in his campaign to reflect the people he was talking to about their concerns about him, mitigating those things, and also how to enhance the strengths of becoming their persona collectively. That same thing can happen in South Carolina to some degree, because when you flip through on election night and you saw the speeches, and granted, there's a lot to celebrate about that night as far as I'm concerned, they were all safe. They were, I'm going to do right by Virginia, and these are the things I care about, and that's because I'm this person. It was a lot of the same stuff, and that is not what you saw in New York. You saw something that was more like, we did it, and can you believe it? And it was as if he was also in the crowd, just chatting it up, but he was in the microphone. The candidate in North Carolina has got to do something more experimental. That's not the place to play it safe. Listen to the people and to some degree become what you're hearing. It's not about accommodating or compromising who you are or your values, but it's a lot about understanding and giving people voice. You can only create that empathy and build that rapport because you heard people, you understand where you are in their story, you understand how to hold their hand and let them guide you into where that story can go, because you don't want to be the villain. I think somebody mentioned earlier about the tension. I think maybe, Scott, it was you, about the tension that exists between how perceptions are of candidates. And there is tension. There is tension about whether or not we are the villain, whether or not we're just the problem, whether or not we're just annoying, whether we don't get them. Where do we fit into that story? We obviously don't necessarily want to do what we've done before. I think we got to be a villain because we tried to be the champion without understanding what we were championing. And I don't know that we can do that. I think we have to be the catalyst for the champion, which is the voter. And we have to act with more humility and be a little bit more humble about how we present ourselves in those conversations. Place like South Carolina, that's ripe for a conversation worth listening to. When you say self-deprecating humor, understanding that I get it. We are not exactly the party that you want us to be, for good reason. Like, open up the door and have more candor and give people the respect. Don't be defensive. Don't act like we're the end all be all. We haven't been. Acknowledge that, because that's where they are. And this research can help us speak to that and understand how to use that to build trust and move forward. There's a reason why we're in Nebraska. And that's because we could win Nebraska. We could win Indiana. We could win Missouri. Yes, math, but also feelings. We can get there. And we just have to give ourselves some credibility that we're not above people. We are among them. And we need to be figuring out how to use that as a strength.
It seems to me that one of the big mistakes that the last two candidates for president did was that they came off as inauthentic. And one thing that Mamdani does really well is he comes across as authentic.
Totally.
And there are probably others out there. I guess Mikey Sherrill, from what I've seen, I haven't really paid all that much attention to different races around the country. Just kind of curious about this. Tallarico won the Texas primary last night. I want to say, do you think Tallarico's authentic? There's something about him that I think is almost a little scary.
Like a robot?
Yeah, but just
I have all the answers.
I'm
Is he AI?
I'm not into slickness, and he seemed that to me. I lean a lot further left than the two of you and him. So I was a little disappointed with the outcome, but I did understand that's the safer choice.
Yeah, I will answer this because I can get myself into some trouble because I'm a moderate.
Yourself in trouble.
I'm a moderate, and my two other partners are more progressive than I am. So it's a good dialogue. It's an array of opinions. I will say, more so than anything, and I know that authenticity has become kind of a throwaway term to some degree, but I would say Tallarico in many ways is a lot like most of the presidential candidates out there right now. They all feel like they are beautifully packaged and trained to connect with people with exactly what they're supposed to say. But when Claire McCaskill was running for Senate in 2012, she was on something, or someone had told her that she was too big. She had too much weight. She was never going to get elected because she had gained weight. And so she started to lose weight, and she said, I have to do this because I have to be this thing in order to get elected. And I was like, no. I mean, if that's what you want to do because you want to feel comfortable, that's great. But what you need to be doing is conveying that vulnerability to people. And she, granted, this is a lot of her. A lot of anything I have that's smart to say, honestly, probably came from some random conversation on an RV in backwoods Missouri with her. But I told her it's kind of like the Oprah effect. For every reason under the sun, people should like want to not love Oprah. Everything she touches turns to gold. She's got more money than she knows what to do with. Everything she does is fantastic. She says she likes a book and it sells off the shelf. Everything she does is great. Why do people love her so much? Why do people love Dolly Parton so much? And that is because there's a vulnerability about the understanding that they are not perfect that becomes endearing and identifying to most people. When Oprah struggled with her weight, she took you on that journey. When Dolly Parton talks about what it is to be treated like a big boobed bimbo, like that's a real thing. Yeah, she likes it. What is her line? It's expensive to look this cheap. She loves, that is a great way to be like, hey, I understand who I am. And you can identify with like, I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And like, that's also worth celebrating. To some degree, some of these candidates feel like they're just so polished that you wonder, like, if AI could create a candidate, this would be it. Yeah, they'd probably be great. They're saying all the right things. Like, he talked about somebody who could pull some scripture. Holy cow, that guy is pretty amazing. But also you wonder, like, and what else is going on there? Everybody's got something. Why aren't you sharing it? What is it? Let us in. Show us that you're a flippin' human. Like, we want to know that you're not a perfect robot. I want to know the ugly side. Let me make that choice. I know that Trump to some degree has normalized things that aren't great. And to some degree, people are sort of like, well, it doesn't matter what comes out anymore. It's all going to be fine. I almost think like that's part of the deal. That's part of what we want to know. Tell us all the warts and let us make a decision. Give us some credibility that we're going to be able to handle it and that we deserve to have that as part of the decision-making process. Because if we had really known a lot of this stuff, we might have been able to build better trust. And which in my view, I don't think that there's a lot remaining with this administration on trust. But I will say that could also be an identifying quality in a Democrat in making a case for president or, in the Senate race, which Texas is winnable. I continue to say it. Texas is winnable. Now, granted, it's like the size of a small country when it comes to the ad spending, but the math, it's possible. And I think that it's going to require more than just super polished language. It's got to be about trust. And right now, I don't know. We'll see.
Absolutely. Well, Adrianne Marsh, Altum-Insight.com is the site. Adrianne, really, thank you for coming on. We want to have you back on, especially when it gets closer to the election. It's always good to get insight from somebody from the inside. Pleasure having you on. Thank you for all the insights. We really do appreciate it. And we definitely want to have you back on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And an extra plug for that presentation. There's actually a video presentation where Frank Spring, our head of research, does like a verbal sort of demonstration of it. And he is just fantastic. He makes science fun. And so just dial in and listen. It's great. And I really appreciate you having me on. This has been super fun.
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershworth, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Sciences, the JICS. This open access journal, double peer-reviewed, provides a platform for emerging scholars to publish their work and engage in meaningful dialogue across disciplines. The JICS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis and is published through the NovaWorks Scholarly Repository at Nova Southeastern University. You'll find a link to the journal in our episode description.